I think hip flexor strengthening specifically for the psoas is a really important part of the process for this postpartum time period. Because when somebody is pregnant, their abdominals get stretched out, and that psoas is the primary vertical stabilizer for the spine, and it pulls double duty to help compensate for the lack of abdominals. So when somebody is in that newly postpartum time period, we're going to want to really work on getting abs back to their natural strength level, getting glutes going, showing up. So when you've got that nice foundation and base and you feel like you've kind of moved on from those basics, then it's time to layer in hip flexion, specifically psoas, because as we work that psoas, we help it let go as well. We show it, okay, you don't have to do all this spinal stability. You can let go a little bit as a spinal stabilizer, let these abdominals help, and you can work in your role as hip flexion more. And as it works in that role as hip flexion, it also works in its role of stabilizing the head of the femur in the socket, which is incredibly important for deep hip rotator, obturator internus, piriformis, tension in the back. So we've got to have this give and take from the front and the back, and we need really strong components coming from both the front and the back. So I think adding in hip flexion is usually important. It's not where I start, but it's an important part of the process once you've got those base layers in place. Now, there's two types of hip flexion that are really nice and easy to start with. I like giving a little bit of head support if anybody has even slightly forward head posture, because I don't want them straining, because I don't want them gripping down on their ribs. And I spend time in front of a computer, so naturally I have a little bit of forward head posture, so let's support that. And then what we're going to start with is a little bit of an isometric hold, but we can do an isometric hold with very small movement as well. Now remember, the psoas does external rotation, the TFL does internal rotation. So as we externally rotate, we're going to be recruiting more psoas for hip flexion. So turn your foot in, knee out, giving you a little bit of external rotation, and you're going to press isometrically, holding into this femoral. Now what you can do is you can do little small movement. The psoas really loves flexion. It's very, very active in flexion as a hip flexor. And so staying up here in a lot of flexion is really good for getting that psoas. And if you try this with me, you can probably feel a lot more inside than you can out here on that TFL. So this is the place I like to start. So a little bit of back and forth motion, little micro movements, as well as an isometric hold. You can also breathe through that, focusing on inhaling into your back, which is going to release that psoas even more and help it show up as a hip flexor. Then what you can do is work into movement. So you can attach a band, you can hook it around their shoe, or you can use your tibialis anterior muscles to support the weight of the band. And then what you're going to think about here is really lengthening. This is a good place to get a nice good glute contraction, lengthened hip flexors, and then you can use a full range contraction on that hip flexor coming up as far as they feel comfortable. And this can be a good way to get full range hip flexor motion. Same thing here. Let that knee drift out a little bit, foot drift in. You're going to get more psoas than TFL, which will be what we want to target with this. All right, give that a try and start working those hip flexors.